I'd like to perhaps start my comments today with a bit of nuancing, because clearly we're having a debate today about bank closures, and this was applied for and considered in a time before much of the current advice was put in place, encouraging many of those in our communities who would be the natural users of our local bank branches, who are now being encouraged to stay at home. So many of my comments that are calling for the banks to remain open, I would say, are very much inclined towards the period beyond when we get past the current situation, and in a situation where we are returning to something of a more normal environment. So today's debate is clearly taking place amongst a backdrop of an unprecedented public health crisis, among grim news, and one positive I already see emerging from that, though, is the mobilisation of communities to protect the most vulnerable among them. I hear tales of shops delivering groceries to older customers, of dog walkers dropping off prescriptions, and people sending kind messages to neighbours in isolation just to let them know that they matter. And these are all hugely important to keep our communities functioning and working together through challenging times. It would be good to see the banks exhibit that same sense of public spiritedness and show a sense of responsibilities to the communities that they serve, and at the very least call a halt to the closure programme until we're through this current situation, rather than quietly closing down branches to never open up again. And I've certainly written to the Bank of Scotland urging them to consider this action. This latest tranche of closures announced by Lloyds Bank of Scotland comes after years of watching the vital network be decimated. Between 2012 and 2019, the UK lost 22% of its bank and building society branches. Around 10% of the rural population lived at least 10 miles away from the nearest branch in 2017. In Scotland, with our high rural population and more challenging demographics, saw a third of branches close in just 9 years, with 610 banks closing between 2010 and 2018. And the announcement in January of 56 branch closures from the Lloyds Group was still a little surprising, as it came just 1 month after Bank of Scotland Managing Director Tara Foley was reported at the opening of a hub in Glasgow saying the bank was committed to the branch network and branches were not going anywhere. Perhaps they need to tell that to my constituents in Loanhead. For hundreds of years, the Bank of Scotland was a respectable stalwart of the Edinburgh establishment, ahead of the field in finance and finding innovative solutions to meet customer needs. Founded in July 1695 by an act of the original Scottish Parliament, the independent one, it started opening branches back in 1774. It was the first bank in Europe to offer paper currency, and in 1826 fought a spirited campaign against attempts from the then Westminster Parliament to outlaw their notes below £5, much aided by the fantastic writer Walter Scott. Scott's Head now adorns their modern banknotes in tribute to this popular and successful campaign, of which I hope this current campaign will be equally as successful. So it is disappointing to see the modern carnation of this once proud brand making life so much harder for those who work with paper notes, wielding the axe so brutally against the communities that helped to build it. When the banks crashed in 2008, Lloyds Group was one of the major recipients of a government bailout, to the tune of £20.3 billion and a 43% public stake in the bank. Now public shares are paid back, profits are high and big bonuses have made a bit of a comeback. In 2018, Lloyds unveiled a £4 billion payout to its shareholders. Statutory profit before tax was up 13% and £464.5 million was given out in bonuses. PPI payouts took its toll last year. Pre-tax profits were down from £6 billion to a meagre £4.4 billion. So Chief Executive Antonio Hoto Osorio took one for the team, pocketing only £4.7 million, compared with £6.5 million the previous year. I know it's meagre and must be difficult to survive in such limited earnings. The idea that they cannot afford to maintain the existing branch network, I would suggest, therefore, is clearly nonsense. As a Midlothian MP, my particular concern today is the looming closure of the last bank in Loanhead. Not just Loanhead. This bank is representing the only bank in the communities of Loanhead, Bilston, Roslin, Rosewell, Straighton, Damhead. So a number of my constituents, beyond simply the town itself, are clearly very concerned about how they're going to access banking. This is a staggering decision which will have a dire economic and social consequences for the town, population around 7,000 right now, but set to rapidly rise with significant new housing developments, something that Bank of Scotland, I feel, has not taken into account in coming to the conclusion that they have. Future growth will rely on start-ups and micro-businesses setting up in an area where ease to the banking service remains vital. Around 20% of small businesses with a turnover below 2 million use branches as their primary source of banking. And access to and being able to get into the bank at a time that's suitable for them will clearly be critical. And the sheer geography of Midlothian doesn't lend itself to even a bank that's maybe 2 or 3 miles away. The physical journey to get to that is not a straight or simple one all the time. The Scottish Affairs Committee confirmed its 2019 report on access to financial services that the impact of losing a bank is particularly acute when it's the last bank in town, as is in this situation. Statistics tell the same story. Research mapping branch closures against the British Bank Association postcode lending data found that SME lending growth was dampened by 63% on average in postcodes that lost a bank branch. And when it's the last bank in town, that figure shot up to 104%. On average, postcodes that lose their last bank receive almost 1.6 million less in lending over the course of a year. Loanhead branch closing will undoubtedly damage this historic town economically, along with the nearby communities in Bilston, Damhead and Roslin, all of whom rely on this bank. Losing the last bank in town will increase financial exclusion of our older and less mobile residents, and being able to go to the high street to do your finances is an important part of staying independent for many people. It's a lifeline. Now, it's fair to say that banking habits have changed, and the Loanhead branch, like most, is certainly less busy than it historically was. And figures in the bank's own closing branch review found a 4% drop in counter transactions from personal customers over 1 year, an 8% drop when businesses are included. But to me, I have to say that would appear to be fairly manageable as a figure, especially when you consider the town is set to expand so significantly in the coming years. It's also true that the majority of the population will be able to do much more of their business online. I'm not denying that in any way. But we don't always want to do our business online, and certainly there are a number of people in our communities who can't do their business online. Most of us appreciate being able to check balances and do transactions whenever we want, although we don't necessarily like it when the IT breaks down or we stumble over the passcodes. But even with this change in behaviour, there is a significant majority of bank customers who completely rely on their local branch, and they do not even have a digital option. The bank's review found that 76% of customers sometimes use other branches, internet or telephone banking. That leaves almost a quarter of their customers who never use these other methods and are solely reliant on this branch. Many of them are in older age groups, and 44% of the customers were over 55, 26% over 65 and 13% over 75. So it's quite clear the older population that will face the worst disruption from these proposed changes. According to Age Scotland, 67% of people over 75 do not use the internet at all. Many older people expressed frustrations with phone banking, lack of trust in digital options, and said that the cost of accessing the technology is in itself inhibitive. In some areas, fast enough connections are not even available. Now, I know work has been done to improve banking services in our post offices, and I welcome this. And the post office network is a fantastic resource for our communities, and it does whatever it can to pick up the pieces when bank abandons a town. We're particularly lucky in Loanhead to have a very accommodating postmaster who I have no doubt at all will do everything in their power to ease a transition of our customers seeking another local place to perform day-to-day transactions. But the post office network is under pressure too. As great a job as it does, they do not have the resources, financial expertise or facilities needed to deliver the full range of bank services when the bank leaves town, nor should it be expected to do so. The concerns were expressed to the Treasury Committee last year about the way the agreement with banks was operating, and the Post Office was put under added pressure, but it did not make a profit from those services. Over half of adults were unaware they could even use it, and half said when asked that they would prefer to deal directly with their bank. There's a long way to go before that gap can be filled, and we must protect for the future for both the Post Office and the branch networks. But it's not only the vulnerable, although that's a good enough reason to call a halt to this ruthless cull in the face-to-face banking. Those who predict the relentless rise of automation sometimes forget another key factor: human nature. Digital banking has a convenience on its side, but it will never replace the human interaction. It was predicted that e-readers like Kindle would kill off printed books. That didn't happen. We see vinyl record sales booming for the younger generation, despite the ridiculous price tags and the simplicity of streaming. Digital and physical formats are finding a happy coexistence in the modern world, and they complement each other as they both have their advantages and disadvantages. The same goes for banking. There are many individuals who sometimes use a branch, sometimes use other means. We need both branch and online banking to thrive in a flexible, inclusive, modern society, and we lose them at our peril. When IT goes wrong, as it does, we all return to the bricks and mortar of a branch, and we need to protect them to ensure that they're there for the future. Last Parliament's Treasury Select Committee warned that if no action was taken, the UK rises inadvertently becoming a cashless society. For a large portion of society, including some of the most vulnerable, this would have stark consequences. We've seen a rapid drop in free ATMs as reduced interchange fee made the business model less viable. The latest figures from Link, the UK's largest cash machine network, revealed that 1,300 ATMs were lost between the end of January and the beginning of July 2018. Consumer organisation Which predicted free cash machines would become a thing of the past after it emerged that 1,700 ATMs switched to charging in the first 3 months of the year alone. We're being pushed towards a cashless society, and we're not prepared for and don't want. And this is not solely through consumer demand, but financial incentives to go cashless. But the creation of a cashless desert, and by the continued running down of a branch network. We're asking people to wash their hands of a lot of money these days, but no longer good enough for the UK government to wash its hands of the serious issue. Like the politics of austerity, the decision to let things slide is a choice, not a necessity. The current access to banking standard does not go far enough to protect customers from branch losses, and alternatives just don't plug the gap. They'll show you how to sign into mobile banking or where to get a bus to the next town, but the loss of a branch is already a done deal. Where the financial service markets fail, we need the government to step up to the plate. We could introduce public service obligation to protect the last branch in a town, for example, and make sure that people have a right to a physical bank branch. The Treasury Committee agreed, saying that intervention by government or the FCA may be necessary to force banks to provide a physical network for customers, and suggested they could make the changes to competition law if necessary to allow banks to share facilities, which is something I would be certainly very keen to see moving forward. For the government to keep brushing this off as a commercial decision is a neglect to its responsibility, and we know there are options to intervene. In fact, they have a duty to do so, I would say, for the well-being of millions of citizens. So I very much look forward to the Minister's response and hope that it will see some action and in turn see the Bank of Scotland reversing this decision to close so many of their branches. Thank you.
The question is that